1974. There was a plane that was coming out from El Paso. It was going to Mexico City, and it was an accident.
Pero dicen que hubo un choque entre un...
They say that there was a crash between a plane and a UFO within the territories of the municipality.
I don't think this could be made up. How could someone make this up? It's true.
August 25th, 1974, 10:07 p.m. It's a quiet summer's night in Cuyame. The town's inhabitants are beginning to turn in. 500 miles away, United States air defense systems suddenly register an unknown flying object over the Gulf of Mexico. Streaking across the sky at over 2,500 miles per hour, at an altitude of 75,000 feet, only one thing is for certain. This is not something man-made. Initial indications are that it's probably nothing more than a meteor. But 60 seconds later, it becomes clear that this is no meteor.
This object was traveling and descending through steps, unlike that of a meteor, again, with more of an arc.
The object appears headed on a course towards Corpus Christi, Texas. American air defense systems are alerted. 10:09 p.m. The unidentified flying object now suddenly veers left and enters Mexican airspace just 40 miles south of Brownsville, Texas. The U.S. continues tracking the puzzling spacecraft as it now races over Mexico. Yet what isn't seen on radar is a small craft headed on a trajectory towards the UFO.
What's also interesting about this case is about the same time as this UFO was zigging and zagging, there was a plane that was leaving El Paso headed towards Mexico City.
Under the cover of night, the small civilian plane from El Paso heads towards Mexico's capital city. But the plane from Texas never reaches its destination. At the same time, the American military watches as their unidentified flying object disappears from radar. It appears that the unthinkable has happened. A UFO plane collision.
There's an assumption that there was a collision of some type where both the craft and the plane had collided.
August 26th, 1974, 8 a.m. 9 hours after a civilian plane disappeared over the desert, a Mexican recovery team hunts for the downed craft. Across the border, American intelligence is listening in. At 10:35 a.m., the Americans intercept the Mexican military radio report. The wreckage of the missing plane has been spotted just outside Cuyame. Moments later, another report shockingly announces the sighting of a second wreck, but this is no plane.
The Mexican recovery team finds a sort of a silver-shaped classic disc, some 16 feet 5 inches, about 5 feet thick, convex on both sides, sort of like a saucer.
The saucer's surface has the appearance of polished steel. It has no markings, no lights, and there are no bodies inside. However, it does appear to be damaged in 2 spots, possibly caused by a collision with the civilian plane and then falling to the ground. Immediately, Mexican officials declare a radio silence on all search activities. Meanwhile, U.S. officials reach out to the Mexican government, offering assistance in the recovery. Their offer is met with a denial.
The Mexican government denied it. They said, no, all we have is just a plane wreckage.
While the Mexican team collects the crash debris, the United States is busy assembling their own elite recovery force at Fort Bliss, Texas. The team includes 4 helicopters, 3 small Hueys, and a large Sea Stallion. Prepped and ready to move out, the team is placed on standby, while U.S. surveillance scopes out the situation.
The U.S. was keeping tabs again through its what I call the spy surveillance network, through their satellite surveillance as well as airplanes that were flying over at low altitude.
American surveillance reveals that the Mexicans have placed the UFO on a flatbed truck and moved out from the crash site.
They were able to see there were a number of dead bodies, so which led them to believe that something very extraordinary had happened.
August 27th, 2:38 p.m. Unsure of what's happened, U.S. officials greenlight their rescue team. 4 helicopters with team members aboard depart Fort Bliss.
One of the things that seems obvious in this case is that the government, the U.S. government, responded very expertly, very quickly and very organized. They had this team that assembled in Fort Bliss, and in no time were down there on site recovering this. They've done this before.
But nothing will prepare the Americans for what they are about to find. Dressed in bioprotection suits, the American soldiers approach the silent convoy and find all the Mexicans dead. There is no time to investigate what killed the Mexican team, but ufologists have their theories.
They somehow came in contact with a lethal agent, a bacteriological agent that was from out of this world, or an extraterrestrial biological agent of some sort that killed them, which is my favorite theory.
The U.S. recovery team quickly tends to business. It finds the 16-foot wide silver UFO strapped to the back of a flatbed truck. The straps are reconfigured and connected to a cargo cable from the Sea Stallion helicopter. Safely secured, the estimated 1,500-pound disc is lifted up and headed back to the U.S. With the saucer gone, the team immediately turns their attention to the remaining evidence. The plane wreckage, vehicles from the convoy, and the Mexican team bodies are gathered.
They gathered the debris, the bodies from the Mexican recovery team, and then they exploded them with high explosives. The reason why is to hide the evidence.
Their work done, the recovery team heads back to base. Where the UFO was taken is unknown. Some have speculated Atlanta, Fort Bliss, or Wright-Patterson Air Force Base.
It is an unprecedented event, and I think it's comparable to what happened in Roswell, New Mexico.
If this 1974 UFO crash was real, there was no evidence to prove it. Only the passing down of the story from generation to generation kept the tale alive, but few took it seriously. That changed in 1991. That year, not one, not two, but dozens of UFO sightings are reported over Mexico. What gives the 1991 sightings credibility is that strangers reported seeing the same thing at the same time on the same day, and yet they were hundreds of miles apart from each other. For over 3 decades, the Mexican desert is alleged to have been the site of an incredible tale.
There were rumors since long ago that an object crashed in Mexico.
An object entered our atmosphere through the United States, and it crashed with a small plane.
For the last 2 decades, Mexico has witnessed UFO incidents that rival anything reported in the United States. Mexicans just needed one uniting event to keep their eyes focused to the sky. That happened in 1991. In July of that year, one of the longest solar eclipses in history is set to happen. The total eclipse is visible only in a narrow corridor that includes central Mexico.
A year in advance, all the Mexican people knew about the eclipse in 91. I mean, it was an event, it was a moment. All around Mexico, there were people waiting for the eclipse.
It was an important eclipse because even though there had been other eclipses that had taken place until that day, they were not on the magnitude of that eclipse.
Just after 1 p.m., the skies above Mexico darken. astronomers adjust their telescopes. Millions gaze skyward. During 1991, consumer technology makes videos commonplace. On this day, many Mexicans use their cameras to capture the moon as it begins to pass in front of the sun. To their disbelief, they also capture something unexpected.
It was a curious thing. During the eclipse, I heard some people who were around us saying, "Look, what is that there also?"
Several people filmed and saw metallic objects that are clearly distinguished with the form of a cupola, and what is commonly called a flying object.
In Mexico City, in Tepeji del Rio, in Puebla, in Cerro de la Estrella. From all corners of Mexico come videos showing a strange metallic-looking object just below the eclipse. The eclipse UFOs, or ovnis as they are called in Mexico, become the talk of the country. But while some are quick to claim that Mexico experienced a UFO encounter, skeptics aren't buying it.
This was one of the great events of the century as far as eclipses and astronomical events, and hundreds and thousands of astronomers, professional and advanced amateur astronomers, came from all over the world, and it converged upon Mexico City and the other towns where the eclipse was visible. Not a single professional astronomer reported seeing anything that wasn't supposed to be there.
Professional astronomers immediately doubt any UFO claims and instead offer a more scholarly response.
When the sun is totally eclipsed, like it was in Mexico on that day, the bright stars and planets become visible for a few minutes. And Venus was very brilliant, and so it was very easy to see when people looked up. And I'm sure that many of the people thought that they saw a UFO.
Skeptics have their answer, but UFO believers have their doubts.
Because of that, because so many people recorded in different cities these objects, some suggested that had to be the star Venus. But Venus was in a different position than the UFOs were in the tapes.
It was something strange that happened during the eclipse. It's afterwards, when you start analyzing and looking at the videos, that you can start to see in some of them that there are movements that maybe wouldn't correspond to a planet. When you start analyzing more calmly after the fact, that's when you start to wonder if it could have been a UFO.
The 1991 sightings ignite a UFO explosion in Mexico.
The effect of the UFOs from the 1991 eclipse was like a snowball. And this allowed people with an interest in UFOs to record sightings more frequently.
While Mexico's UFO explosion comes as a surprise to most, some ufologists believe it was actually predicted over 1,000 years ago. The Maya were one of the great civilizations in history. For over 600 years, they built cities, constructed reservoirs and temple pyramids, and developed an incredible understanding of astronomy.
It is incredible the knowledge that the Maya had about the sky and the planets. They had a great capacity of observation, they knew the celestial movement, and were able to determine every single important event that was going to be registered in the sky.
The Maya recorded their information on foldable books called codices. Most of these texts were burned by Spanish priests during the 1500s. Today, just 4 Mayan codices remain. Among them is the Dresden Codex, a document that offers an enigmatic glimpse into the Mayans' astral wisdom.
It's pure astronomical, the moon, the sun, the systems, everything is there. Anybody who has studied and analyzed that consider this document a real treasure from the past.
Among the information contained in this codex is an eclipse prediction cycle.
The eclipse of 1991 appears in the Dresden Codex.
But did the Dresden Codex predict something more?
In it, they talk about the meeting with the Brothers of the Stars, which in our language we call extraterrestrials.
When I read this, after receiving all these videos, that struck me, that really affected me, because it's like if The Mayans knew long in advance that these sightings were going to take place that day. How can you explain that? Is that a coincidence? Or they knew? I think they knew.
Over a century later, most Mexicans knew something out of the ordinary was happening. Their UFO wave had turned into a tsunami. Literally overnight, Mexicans are mesmerized by the apparent UFO wave striking their country. Ufologists point to the open-mindedness of the Mexican people as being partly responsible for this UFO explosion.
Mexicans have been fascinated by legends, stories, elves, fairies. That psychology and sociology allows Mexicans to keep an open mind when it comes to extraordinary occurrences. When you open yourself up to other possibilities, it is much easier to accept the UFO phenomenon.
However, skeptics claim that Mexico's UFO wave is more of a social phenomenon than any actual increase in visits from little green men.
Sightings always seem to come in waves, and these waves are generally, they correlate with the publicity, that if the newspapers or TV stations, whatever, are filled with stories about UFO sightings, people will go out and pay much more attention to things that they see.
Since the earliest UFO sightings, witnesses have always been subject to heavy ridicule. They are portrayed as overzealous sky watchers who wouldn't know a DC-9 from a weather balloon. But what happens when the witness is someone who doesn't fit into these categories? What if the person has a solid reputation and career? What if the witness doesn't just know a DC-9, but flies one? Captain Raimundo Cervantes has been flying for over 40 years. With 17,000 hours of flight time, he has seen it all. Or at least he thought so. July 28, 1994. Captain Cervantes is piloting Aeromexico Flight 129 from Guadalajara to Mexico City. He's taken the route before and everything seems in order, including the weather.
Totalmente claras. Totally clear. Like we, the aviators, say. We could see the next day. Totally clear.
As the flight nears Mexico City International Airport, Cervantes puts the DC-9 on course for landing. 5,000 feet in the air, he receives the all-clear from the control tower and prepares to lower the landing gear.
I ordered to lower the front wheel. At that moment, we felt an impact on the plane. Very strong.
Muy fuerte. The plane is rocked. To Cervantes, it appears obvious that they have collided with something in midair, but there is no time to investigate. The pilot has already begun his descent of the DC-9.
At that moment, I declare an emergency, and I requested an area so that I can develop the list of emergency and coordinate my personnel of flight attendants, because I thought we were going to have an abnormal landing.
Unsure of the condition of the damage to his landing gear, Cervantes needs nerves of steel to coax the wounded jet to safety.
We level the plane. We tried to land softly and steady the front wheel. I was concerned that there was damage. We lower the front wheel, and to our surprise, the plane starts rolling perfectly.
Y nuestra sorpresa, empieza a rodar el avión perfectamente bien.
Disaster is averted. Captain Cervantes wonders if a helicopter has clipped his DC-9 on approach. But the air tower's radar records discredit that theory. Yet an inspection of the DC-9 reveals damage and creates more questions than answers.
There was a flight inspector that searched the plane who detected that one of the hydraulic lines was cut. It was cut like if it was done with a cutter. Something very strange.
What caused the landing gear's hydraulic line to be cut? A subsequent investigation will place blame for the incident on worn-out parts, and the airline denies any mid-air collision. But Captain Cervantes stands by his claim that the plane hit something. That isn't the end of the story. Flight 129's strange encounter is about to get even stranger. Enrique Colbeck is an air traffic controller who was in the tower that night. Upon learning of Flight 129's incident, he instantly flashes back to a series of phone calls the tower had received earlier that evening.
An hour before that flight was initiated in Guadalajara, we received phone calls from different sources. They were communicating to us that an object was flying very close to a building that is almost in the final trajectory to these runways.
The sightings place the unidentified flying object right in the landing path of Flight 129. To most, the idea of a plane UFO collision seems unrealistic. But a few days later, another incident at the same airport raises suspicions that something out of the ordinary is going on. August 8, 1994. Co-pilot Carlos Corzo is helping Aeromexico Flight 304 from Acapulco begin its descent into Mexico City International Airport. The morning skies are partly cloudy as co-pilot Corzo looks out the cockpit window. The pilot's eyes are glued to the instruments.
He was flying by instruments, so all his view was on the instruments. I was taking care of the surroundings and seeing outside and even take the communications and helping him with the approach.
As the plane breaks through a cloud, a shocked Corzo finds something unexpected.
I was leaving 12,000 feet and came out of the cloud, and I see this big object in front of us, and I really get scared. I thought we was going to have a collision, and I tell my captain in a surprise expression that, oh my God, we're gonna crash.
The mysterious craft streaks by the front of Flight 304, barely missing the plane's nose.
It was a huge object, maybe 15 or 20 meters radio, something like platinum or some kind of very neat metal.
Corzo quickly regains his composure and helps land the plane without further incident. Afterward, he speaks to an air traffic controller who reveals that Corzo's plane was in fact the 5th plane that week to report seeing an unidentified object.
I can tell you about approximately 99% of pilots that I have talked to believe that we are not alone here. And the evidence that we have had confirms it. We take it very seriously because it could affect our airspace.
Definitely, there is a potential danger because we do not know what produces the phenomenon and what it is made of and why it is manifested.
Nearly a decade later, another incident in the Mexican skies would send shockwaves worldwide. Yet, unlike previous encounters, this one would have everyone believing, including the Mexican government. Every year on the night of September 15th, they come together. Thousands pack the main square in Mexico City to watch their president ring the very same bell that signaled the start of their fight for independence almost 2 centuries ago. The next 24 hours will be full of parades, parties, and celebrations. But in the early 1990s, a new Mexican Independence Day tradition is born.
El 16 de septiembre en México es la fiesta de independencia. September 16 is Mexican independence, and we have a military parade on the streets of Mexico. Durante varios años, for several years, we used to have an air show. The whole Mexican Air Force used to go out and fly over Mexico City. La Ciudad de México.
Mucha gente pues grababa los. A lot of people would film these events when the planes would pass over the houses.
De las casas haciendo algunas maniobras.
There are many videos where certain objects are seen, flying over and passing closely.
Sobrevolando y pasando incluso muy cerca.
September 16th, 1991. During a flyover, an amateur videographer captures a mysterious bright round object. September 16th, 1992. An unidentified object is spotted flying through the sky. September 16th, 1993. As a squadron of helicopters conducts maneuvers, a metallic-looking object appears to weave through their formation. 3 years, 3 sightings. Yet the Mexican military offers no comment on the encounters.
With respect to the sightings of these objects during military parades, the government never voiced an opinion for or against. The government here has always remained aloof.
This comes as no surprise to the UFO community, who for decades has claimed that governments are actively suppressing UFO encounters. Blacked out reports, secret projects, and constant denials have all fed the notion of a massive cover-up. March 5th, 2004. Mexico's 501 Air Squadron is on a routine search for drug smuggling aircraft. But the military pilots witness something far from routine.
The Air Force in Mexico patrols the south border to stop airplanes with narcotics from South America. They do this many times every day with different airplanes.
But this day is different. During an afternoon surveillance run, the team picks something up on their radar. They assume it's a drug-running plane and take off after it. Following it on radar, the object appears to be changing speeds erratically, at times traveling at over 380 miles per hour. While in pursuit, the crew turns on their forward-looking infrared system, or FLIR.
It's like a camera that is mounted on the aircraft, and its purpose is to look not using visible light like an ordinary camera would, but using infrared.
The infrared eyes of the plane's exterior-mounted FLIR system transmits video to the crew inside. This is the actual video as seen by the crew. But as Mexican Air Patrol gets closer to the object, the crew are unable to spot anything using the FLIR or with their own eyes.
All this time that they're flying towards it, they are looking ahead of the aircraft, because that's where it says that this radar target is, ahead of the aircraft, and they're looking, they couldn't see anything.
After chasing the object for several minutes, the crew determines they are too low on gas to continue the hunt. They turn around and begin heading back to the base. The unknown object soon vanishes from radar. Yet, their adventure is just beginning.
The FLIR operator was still operating the FLIR, and he started picking up bright lights that appeared to be at cloud level.
Suddenly, appearing on the FLIR through the clouds isn't just one ball of light, but at times as many as 11 objects appear to be weaving through the clouds.
The crew got a little bit spooked over what was going on because they couldn't identify these things. They didn't know what it was they were looking at.
This is a veteran crew who have flown this route before and have been using the FLIR system for almost 2 years. But on this day, even the most experienced of pilots would be unnerved, as the cockpit recordings reveal. It appears to the crew the objects aren't just traveling alongside their plane, but surrounding it.
Jóvenes, no estamos solos. No estamos solos, de veras. Qué cosa tan rara, Nos están rodeando. Oye, ¿qué tienes?
Then suddenly, the balls of light disappear, leaving a scared and confused crew to return to base. Over the next several weeks, the Mexican military conducts an investigation into the incident. Crew members are interviewed, images analyzed, and weather data evaluated, yet no answers are found. It appears this case is destined to go unsolved and forgotten. Then one phone call changes everything and makes UFO history.
They called me and said, we have something that is from common interest.
Mexican TV journalist Jaime Maussan is an expert on investigating Mexican UFO claims. Mason's impressive resume attracts the Mexican government, who ask the civilian reporter to assist. In an unprecedented move, Mexico's Secretary of Defense hands over to Mason the classified FLIR UFO video.
He gave me the video and said, please be fair with the military, please be fair with these pilots, do your investigation, you are authorized officially to do your investigation, to present this in the media.
Mason is given complete access to flight records, weather reports, and most importantly, the crew members.
I am interviewing these pilots inside the Secretary of Defense. This is first in history in Mexico. They told me what they saw. They were very honest and sincere.
No, we never had the opportunity to identify them visually.
I never saw this kind of object before.
Something that we never saw before. It never happened to us before. So yes, we had fear.
On May 11th, Mason holds a press conference to present the tape to the world. It doesn't take long for skeptics to denounce any UFO theory. Their explanations come fast and furious.
It's ball lightning. You'd have a whole fleet of these top secret aircraft flying.
Some skeptics and UFO investigators suggested that the equipment was not working well.
One after another, explanations are given, and one after another, they are discredited. However, a new theory emerges that might solve the mystery.
There's a theory that what the officials filmed out there were the flames of the oil wells that are 100 to 120 kilometers from the account.
They appear to be brilliant glowing objects in the infrared. Of course, they were not visible to the eye, but that's the whole purpose of the infrared camera system, is so that you can see things by their heat signature. You can see things that are not visible to the eye.
Could what was showing up on the FLIR system actually be distant oil wells? Those who've examined the case have their doubts.
First thing that we did was analyze the lights to determine their shape, to see if there was shape to them, and how did it change frame to frame, minute to minute.
If the lights are oil wells, as skeptics have claimed, then they should flicker like a flame. But using computer programs to break down the lights reveals something very different.
Over a period of frames and minutes, the glow may change on the outer edges, but there is an object in the center that is rock steady. It's a ball, it's a sphere, and it's not possible that it's a flame, because if it was a flame, it would be undulating not just from the edges out, but over the entire object.
Adding to the case against the oil well theory is the fact that despite flights in this area daily, no one has ever reported this kind of encounter before.
The only way, really, to prove this would be to do it under the same basis, using a FLIR camera, flying the same route, probably with the same airplane.
Until that happens, the Mexican Air Force encounter remains an unsolved mystery. But for UFO researchers, that doesn't take away from the importance of this landmark case. For the first time, a government turned to the UFO community for help. Mexican UFO investigators are optimistic that this incident may signal a new era of openness by governments.
This is going to produce many new cases and more openness in the future. There are many other people who are now trying to become investigators in Mexico. This is just the beginning.
It was just the beginning. In 2005, just when it appeared things couldn't get any stranger in Mexico, they did. Since 1991, Mexican witnesses have videotaped hundreds of hours of footage containing alleged unidentified flying objects. But while the sheer volume of sightings has impressed some, it's what's on these tapes that matters.
But out of the thousands of videos that we have, most of the times are, balloons, airplanes, stars, mistakes, honest mistakes. Probably just 10 or 15% of them are good, really good.
It's this 10% that has drawn the attention of everyone from ufologists to the mainstream media. Among the most interesting UFO phenomenons captured on tape are what is referred to as fleets.
A group of more than 3 objects we call fleets. They travel horizontally or vertically with very strange forms as boomerangs, spheres, discs.
June 10th, 2004, Guadalajara, Mexico. An amateur photographer captures unknown objects in the sky. June 21st, 2004, 300 miles away in Cuernavaca, Mexico, another fleet is caught on tape. March 30th, 2005, almost 600 miles north in Torreon, yet more unexplainable objects dot the Mexican sky. April 11th, 2005, 500 miles to the south in Mexico City, the skies over the capital city are full of mysterious aircraft.
I believe it's a way that someone is using to communicate with us. I believe they are trying to say something similar to what happened in England with the crop formations.
Skeptics are quick to dismiss fleets as nothing more than weather balloons or birds. But seeing is believing. And in June 2005, a fleet sighting had people believing.
One of the more recent accounts of UFO sightings here in Mexico happened here in Jalapa, Veracruz. And it is very interesting because the witnesses were of a very high caliber.
June 24th, 2005, 10:30 a.m. A public ceremony is being held to celebrate the delivery of new patrol cars to the local police department. On hand are such dignitaries as Governor Fidel Herrera Beltran, high-ranking police department officials, and the local media. Moments after Governor Beltran finishes his speech, cries of UFO, UFO echo through the crowd. Instantly, all eyes are on the mysterious objects hovering above.
We have as a first-hand witness the governor of Jalapa, and the newspapers published the news the next day, and it was spread throughout Mexico.
Days later, a local newspaper reports that the alleged UFOs were actually balloons released by local school children. But this explanation only raises more questions for UFO believers. If they were balloons, why did they appear frozen in formation for over half an hour?
As the witness says, it was more than 14 sphere objects that were shining in the sky, formed a triangle formation and remained there for 30 minutes. I just find it hard to believe that balloons could stay in the same place and in the same formation for half an hour.
I think this is an extraordinary observation because it's a governor and all of his advisors and police personnel who observed this case. Would you say to the governor that he didn't see something strange in the sky?
It's those strange things in the sky that have brought together these UFO experts and enthusiasts. From all parts of Mexico, they have come to discuss the UFO wave that their country has undergone. For these men and women, the encounters that have taken place deserve attention and answers. Among the incidents they examined is the alleged 1974 UFO plane collision near Coyame, Mexico.
The word is getting around somehow that something happened and that the U.S. was interested in this crash.
The information that Gilberto has is very little, but the data that makes this case lends itself to the possibility that this may have been real.
That there was a wave around the spacecraft that allowed it somehow not to be a spacecraft, but a time machine. And the reason is that to travel the kinds of vast distances it had to travel, it had to leave what we understand in physics as a space-time continuum, drop out of that, and suddenly reappear in a new spot.
In Corso's personal notes are sketches detailing his concepts. Corso speculates that the alien craft is navigated by a mind control interface fitting the alien cranium.
It seemed as though by revolving the headband around the alien brain drawings, you would match up the pickups on the headband with various parts of the alien brain.
His background research complete, Corso maintains he is ready to move on to the next phase, distribution. He will hand off the alien technology he says comes from Roswell to appropriate defense contractors for development.
Try to imagine what would happen if a spaceship crashed on Earth and there was a fabulous piece of technology and somebody like Corso pulled it out and gave it to research labs and said, here guys, figure out how this works.
The result, Corso maintains, will lead to a complete reconfiguring of the world's most advanced technologies. In the early 1960s, America's military might is directed toward fighting the Cold War. Lieutenant Colonel Philip Corso wants to bring alien technology from Roswell into the fray. By the end of the summer of 1961, he maintains that he begins to contact military weapons labs about his alien artifacts.
Now, the Army laboratories also had civilian scientists there, and they developed this relationship of handling classified material. Phil Corso felt very comfortable working through the Army laboratories to the civilian scientists because the clearances were all taken care of by the laboratory.
America is dotted with top-secret high-tech labs where civilian scientists work on sensitive military projects. Los Alamos, home of the Manhattan Project, is perhaps the most famous. But in 1961, Fort Belvoir in Virginia is quietly working on a decade-long project to develop night vision engineering. Corso claims he makes this lab the first he approaches with alien technology.
In order to get these things reverse engineered properly, you couldn't just take this to a Radio Shack. I mean, it had to go to a place where somebody would understand the technology.
According to Corso, Roswell eyewitnesses report that the alien craft has image-intensifying technology. If one went inside the ship and looked out, the world outside would look as bright as day, even at night. There is also, according to Corso, a lens taken out of an alien's eye that has light-enhancing properties. No one knows how the two are related, says Corso, but he knows their potential value. Corso maintains that by the late summer of 1961, he helps researchers at Fort Belvoir by showing them the alien light-enhancing lens and possibly other light-enhancing technology from the Roswell craft.
This was a kind of technology that, although we think we have a very clear line of development going back to the Second World War, we take a look at how this technology has literally geometrically exploded over the years. Now, can this be attributed to this technology that was picked up at Roswell, according to Corso? Well, according to him, it can be.
Corso says he wasn't able to further develop the alien mind control interface. His theory was that it would only function with an alien brain. But this momentary setback, he claims, didn't forestall development of another Roswell artifact, an imprinted circuit of mysterious design.
We also had a little charred chip. Small thing, maybe 3/8 of an inch square, 2 threads coming out, and a little window in the center with thin wires. These came from Roswell. We didn't know exactly the function of these integrated circuits, but we suspected that these were circuits, electrical circuits.
Corso asserts that he brings the object to Bell Labs, which had developed the transistor 14 years earlier. He says scientists there were able to analyze and later recreate the alien microchip.
What would happen if something like that were to occur? Well, what would happen is, in a very short time, the world would be transformed radically.
There's no doubt that after the development of the integrated circuit in the early 1960s, the world is transformed. Electronic devices from the cell phone to the laptop computer become reality. Corso claims the Roswell microchip was supposedly damaged from the crash, but that in his possession is another alien object, this one apparently fully functioning.
He knows from reports that when people were shining this thing around, it caused burning on the surfaces that it was aimed at.
Corso says he reads classified military reports speculating that the artifact from Roswell, apparently capable of burning holes in walls, is some kind of cutting tool, perhaps used for surgery. At Hughes Aircraft, from the late 1950s into the early 1960s, researchers have been working on what would become the first laser tracking and targeting devices for military aircraft. But engineers have run into a snag in their efforts to create a practical device. That is, Corso asserts, until he shows them the alien cutting tool.
It did accelerate after 1960-61 because people figured out new ways to make lasers. And as the science advanced, the engineering advanced.
Corso's filing cabinet reportedly contains another treasure from the Roswell trove.
It was glass tubes. And they emitted different color lights. And those were sent to Bell Laboratories. From that was one of the greatest advancements I think we have today, came out in fiber optics.
Many UFO researchers theorize that the spacecraft had no wiring because it was fitted instead with fiber optic cable. Transmitting information with light happens to be an old technology. It dates back to one of the pioneers of the telephone, Alexander Graham Bell, who experimented with a device he called the photophone in 1880.
Most people have never heard of it, but back in his day, serious scientists thought that the photophone was a more impressive invention than the telephone. The photophone was a way that you could transmit a voice signal over a beam of light.
Corso's research tells him that data transmission via light had failed because scientists could not direct a beam of light around corners. But Corso contends that the Roswell artifacts might hold the answer.
They were looking at this glass fibers and say, wow, the light actually turns a corner. How can light go in curves? And then they concluded the reason for that was because it had a cladding wrap on it. The cladding was the key discovery you had to make in order to make fiber optics work.
Although it would not be until the 1970s that fiber optics were in general use, UFO researchers believed that the cladding wrap on the alien artifact, an outer covering on the fiber that guided the light, made it possible for earthly fiber optics to advance. Corso also says he examined some curious super strong fibers that his military reports claim come from the aliens' flight suits.
The first thing of the fabric that amazed me was a thread that I couldn't cut with a razor blade. Just a thread.
In his book, Corso offers a theory about the fibers composing the alien flight suits.
The alien bodies, probably the more vulnerable aspects, were protected from what had to be incredible energies by the super tenacity of the fabric, which somehow formed a shield. And Corso said they didn't put these on they were woven around them. In other words, they spun them like a cocoon.
According to Corso, he wonders if these super strong fibers could be developed into super strong bulletproof shields for law enforcement and military use.
Corso said that the Army tried to bring it to the University of Colorado to try and fabricate this technology.
The mid-1960s saw great advances in super strong fabrics that used polymer technology, the type of molecules that Corso claimed were present in his alien fabric. In 1965, Kevlar was invented, a fabric that would be used in bulletproof vests. More proof, according to Corso, of the impact of alien technology. There's no denying that the period Corso works in the Pentagon coincides with a period of rapid technological growth in the United States. Corso's supporters say alien technology played a role, but others see things very differently. In his best-selling book, The Day After Roswell, Lieutenant Colonel Philip Corso claimed to introduce alien technology from the 1947 Roswell crash to the American military's technological agenda. But others say that the scientific leaps of the 1960s were not made by one hero, and not with the help of aliens.
It's nice to think in terms of one heroic person leading us into the new world of far-out technology learned from saucers. That sounds great. But having worked on a whole host of big research and development programs, that isn't the way it works. Look, on the aircraft nuclear propulsion program, we employed 3,500 people. 1,100 of them were engineers and scientists. We were spending $100 million a year. That's the kind of effort it takes to develop new technology. And that was in 1958 dollars at that.
Corso claims that the laser jumped from theory to practice after scientists examined the device found in the Roswell crash debris. But to science historians, that's science fiction.
The laser is a good example of an invention that doesn't really have a single eureka moment where somebody gets a brilliant inspiration and then they go down into their basement workshop and 15 minutes later they've hammered together a laser. The laser really began back in 1951 when a physicist from Columbia University was taking a walk in Washington.
That physicist was Charles Towns.
And I woke up early in the morning worrying about why hadn't we been able to get anywhere. It was before breakfast, so I went out and walked out in the park, sat down in the park. Suddenly I said, hey, wait a minute. We can get a whole collection of molecules all in excited states with excess energy. And I wrote down the numbers to see now, could I make it oscillate?
And it took him 2 years and $50,000 in government grants before he could come up with the very first barely operable microwave laser.
The first laser device used microwaves rather than light. The light-emitting version wasn't functional until 1960, 9 years after Professor Towns jotted down his notes. As for aliens jump-starting the process...
No, aliens had nothing to do with the technology of the laser, nor do I... Unfortunately, I don't think aliens have given us any new information yet.
While the laser's development was slow and steady, the integrated circuit advanced rapidly. But the greatest progress was made by scientists well after Corso retired.
The real breakthrough happened in 1971 when a guy named Ted Hoff conceived of the idea of putting an entire microprocessor on one piece of silicon, a computer on a chip.
Basically what happens in an integrated circuit is that you are controlling the flow of electrons, or actually in some cases the absence of electrons.
Ted Hoff, known as the architect of the microprocessor, started working on integrated circuits in 1968. Hoff disputes Corso's claim that an alien chip captured from the Roswell crash made an earthly version conceivable.
If you have a crash scenario, there's presumably damage done, and that damage may make the device even harder to analyze. And even if you had the device, you'd really want a context. If you had seen this device in those days and had no context to put it in other words, what's it used for, you'd even have less chance of understanding it.
Hoff also says that to reverse engineer an integrated circuit, as Corso claimed happened in 1961, you would need a scanning electron microscope, which was not invented until 1966.
Even looking at devices today, the resolution of the devices are such that ordinary optical microscopes really don't reveal them. So you need something more sophisticated. I don't think at that time anybody would have been able to figure out what it was.
Philip Corso also claimed that his alien fiber optics cable inspired scientists. But science historians don't support his assertion because fiber optics required a convergence of technologies occurring over decades of development.
The idea really became interesting in 1965 when lasers were available and people suddenly realized there was a commercial use for fiber optics. So shortly after that, the project was tackled by a trio of inventors at Corning, and they came up with a successful fiber optic in 1970.
The highly directional light of a laser improved signal strength. The team of researchers at Corning Glass created a form of fused silica. This super pure glass material was capable of carrying 65,000 times more information than copper wire. This made fiber optics commercially practical, 10 years after Corso claimed to have accelerated the technology.
That's the real achievement that Don Keck and Peter Schultz and Bob Maurer came up with when they were at Corning. It was coming up with this completely unexpected way to make glass.
Corso also stated that he inspired a quantum leap in image enhancement technology. But science historians say the technology of turning night into day was also decades in the making.
Progress increased so incrementally. It goes all the way back to the 1940s when image-intensifying radar scopes were issued to Allied troops in the Pacific Theater.
The first night vision gear employed thermal imaging. Developed by the Germans during World War II, it brought heat energy into the visible spectrum using an infrared light and a receiver. Then, by the early 1960s, William Spicer, a Defense Department researcher, had created image intensification technology. Fort Belvoir scientists built upon his work. Image intensification requires no additional light. Functioning like a radio receiver for light waves, it amplifies existing light. Today's image intensifiers are small enough to be worn as goggles and are capable of amplifying light by a factor of 35,000. Scientists suggest that if Corso really had an alien image enhancer, showing it to researchers in the 1960s did little to advance the technology's measured progress.
The engineering that was required just progressed at a very slow rate. Making night vision work was largely the result of really brilliant engineering.
Finally, according to technology experts, Corso's super tenacity fibers came not from alien spacesuits, but from years of research by a scientist named Stephanie Kwolek, who worked at the DuPont Company. She learned how to organize super strong chains of atoms in 1965, and by 1971, Kevlar was on the market.
The theory that something like Kevlar came off a flying saucer strikes me as being insulting to someone like Stephanie Kwolek, who poured enormous amounts of effort, years of her life, tremendous dedication and brain power went into cracking the secrets of nature.
Furthermore, some skeptics insist Lieutenant Colonel Corso simply didn't have the technical background to run a reverse engineering program.
I read something he'd written years ago and found that it was not high-tech. I worked for General Electric, Westinghouse, General Motors, TRW Systems, McDonnell Douglas, with lots of technical people. I'm a physicist myself. And I saw nothing in what Corso had written that gave any indication of his having the knowledge, the skills, the talent, the background to handle stuff like this and get it into industry.
Corso had an answer to this objection, claiming that his team of A-list scientists helped him interpret the Roswell cache.
I didn't have the training or the background for something. You know, they got highly technical. But fortunately, the German scientists were there. I knew von Braun, and I knew Hermann Obert. Obert was a man that said we've been helped. But we had to keep it quiet to protect our budget, to protect our organization.
For doubters, there is also the issue of Corso's rank. A lieutenant colonel, some argue, wouldn't be running things as Corso claimed he was.
I think an indication of his value to the military would have been given by the fact that he was not a full colonel, despite all his years in service.
But others stand by Corso's assertions, particularly those who say they're familiar with the way the U.S. military functions.
Back in those days, you know, a lieutenant colonel had a lot more authority and position than a lieutenant colonel today has. And even today, you've got lieutenant colonels doing quite a bit of the important tactical and even strategic planning and operation.
The History Channel contacted the military contractors Corso claims to have worked with, and all say there was no alien involvement in the technologies Corso says he jump-started. No memos, directives, or paperwork of any kind exist to directly support Corso's assertions about reverse engineering alien technology. But Corso's supporters say there is no paper trail for a very good reason. Among those who believe there was an alien crash near Roswell, there is consensus on one concept. The U.S. government systematically suppressed the truth.
The government of the United States and other governments around the world have gone out of their way to keep that wrapped up inside a riddle that's smothered by an enigma.
Philip Corso says he also had to keep his reverse engineering program under wraps.
We couldn't discuss it. We made a decision. It cannot be discussed outside of us. We're doing good. We have the authority, we have the money for our R&D projects. Well, that's fine. Let's keep it that way. Let's not get mixed up in the murky area of whether they exist or not.
As for Corso's contributions to the advancement of science, skeptics say that the technology he claimed to have pushed forward was ready to emerge anyway. As proof, they offer up the mind control headband, one alien technology that Corso did not claim to develop. Today, it's well on its way to becoming a reality without his help. Since the 1970s, scientists have been experimenting with using EEG readouts of brain waves to provide feedback and change behavior. It's now possible to use EEG feedback games like this one to learn how to manage brain states. But mind control technology has advanced even further than that.
Going to open the first email, which says congrats. It says you...
In 2004, researchers received FDA approval to test tiny brain implants designed to allow disabled people to control computers using their thoughts.
Next, I'm going to paint a circle.
UFO researchers say the government's supposed cover-up may forever obscure the facts of Roswell, and therefore also obscure the truth about whether alien technology played a supporting role in the development of fiber optics, super strong fabrics, lasers, integrated circuits, or battle-ready image enhancement.
Some people think that, for example, aliens intervened in 3500 BC in Egypt to help the Egyptians build pyramids. You know, well, doggone it, the Egyptians of 3500 BC were fully capable of putting big blocks on top of other big blocks, right? If the Egyptians had suddenly developed cell phones or something like that, then I would say, okay, there's intervention there. But that's not what they did.
But while Lieutenant Colonel Philip Corso might be questioned, his ideas deemed controversial, and his predictions dismissed as the stuff of science fiction, his impact on UFO legend and lore can never be minimized.
The military, the Pentagon, the government of the United States does not give that type of authority to a loose cannon. This man was highly regarded, highly respected.
At my age, what do I have to lose? I have to let my grandchildren and my children know this, because how long will I be around yet? And when I go, it goes with me.
There must have been many days that Philip Corso said to himself, why me?